Okay. That's working.
Yes.
Go. Okay. That's just sad. You're never going to clap as loudly again. Anyway, thanks all. Let's keep going. As Amara mentioned, I'm Kshitij. I'm the senior analytics engineer at Vouch. So Vouch is a company for tech-enabled business insurance for startups. I've put the link to, this is the Slack channel, so go in there if you have questions about whatever I talk about later. And I guess, as mentioned, I'm a DBT power user and software engineer turned analytics engineer, so I used to be a software engineer, and so a lot of this talk is about stuff that I see in software engineering that I wish analytics engineering had. Okay, so next, so the agenda. Okay, so there's 4 key parts of this talk, what is change management, getting started with change management, scaling up change management, and sort of how we put it into practice with a technique that I've called automated guardrails. There's a lot of words for these things, but stick with that. Cool, so let's kind of move on. So the first section is what is change management and why you should care. A lot of you probably don't know what it is, and that's great. But a lot of you maybe have come from a software/agile kind of background, and you know what it is. So this is kind of a Wikipedia definition. It is useful sometimes. It's a process, either manual or automated, used to ensure that changes to a product or system are introduced in a controlled and coordinated manner. On this slide, I want you to pay attention to 3 words. It's process, controlled, and coordinated. And so I think the most important of these is this is process, right? It's not something that you do and you're done with. It's something that your organization just keeps doing and sort of keeps getting better at. The next 2 are controlled and coordinated. We don't want changes to your system, whether that be a DBT project or analytics system, airflow pipeline, whatever the case may be, to essentially be stressful for everyone involved. And so having it in a controlled and coordinated manner means that you've kind of scoped it appropriately, you've taken appropriate risk mitigation, and so that things have it's a lot less likely to go wrong. Cool, so why change management? Ship faster at scale with confidence, rocket emoji, because we like rockets. So I think there's 6 words in there, and I think it's useful to think of them 2 at a time. So ship faster, at scale, and with confidence. And we'll explore each of these and sort of how Vouch does it. And so that's kind of one reason. The other sort of reason is we want to de-risk a project by defining the scope up front. If there are things that are unknown when we start the project, but that we can know prior to start working on it, it's often a lot easier to sort of scope that out, or at least explicitly call that out so that things are a lot clearer when you're implementing it and you can just focus on implementation. You don't have to focus on what is the scope and how do we redefine it. And a common term in software for this is scope creep, where the scope just keeps getting larger and larger. And then the second part is also just reducing the tribal knowledge by documenting processes. And so tribal knowledge is things that one person in your team knows. And you don't want that because in a very sort of gory metaphor, what if they get hit by a bus? This is bus factor. Silicon Valley loves this. So essentially, you just want to make sure that the knowledge in your team is spread out between different people so that you're not fully dependent on one person to do something important in your project. And on a more positive note, you can also align team members' schedules and interests. And so schedule means if they take vacation, you can sort of still keep making progress on a project. You're not sort of blocked on their schedule. And also their interests. If there's a certain project that they want to get deeper into, then you can sort of make that happen if you essentially follow change management. Cool. So this is kind of what it looks like at Vouch. All these stats that I'll show in this slide and throughout the talk are straight from our DBT repo in GitHub. So it's all open. So this is for the past month, essentially. We've had 55 commits to main, so about 2 a day, a bit less than 2 a day, and 129 files, and like net about like 3,000 lines of code changed, which I think is quite a lot for like analytics teams. You tell software teams this, and they're not impressed. But for analytics teams, it's a lot. I think the part that like I'm sort of like most focused on, and that you should probably keep in mind, is that there's like 9 unique contributors, and so that's the graph at the bottom on like how many unique people contributed to this project. And this is what our DAG looks like. I have a curved 34-inch monitor. I had to turn it on its side and then take a screenshot full screen. So this is that view. So 292 models, 1290 tests. It's too small. You cannot read anything. The lawyers at the company are happy with that. Next. OK, with confidence. Did I skip a slide? Let's see. Nope. OK. Cool. So with confidence means that you're doing all the tests that you wanted to do. And so these are kind of the tests we run as part of our build process. So we do dbt build. I was building some staging tables, so like it's 42 seconds. And then we run SQL fluff, which is 47 seconds, docs generate, and then YAML check. And I'll talk to like what each of these things are later in the talk if you're not too familiar with it. Cool. So I guess that's kind of like how we do things, and hopefully like the stage is set for the next part, which is like how do you actually get into it? Like all this sounds great. Now what? Right? So getting started with change management, 5 patterns you can use today. You always need like a BuzzFeed type thing here, where it's like n number of whatever. So 5 patterns. Let's go. OK, so the first one is acceptance criteria. This is a diagram I found on the internet, which is essentially the good way to like frame problems is like, here's scenarios like the context given is like when X happens, given is the context, when X happens, then I expect something and something and something. And those last something, something, something are basically your acceptance criteria. And that's basically what you're trying to build should accomplish. A weird kind of thing is like meta acceptance criteria. So like acceptance criteria for writing acceptance criteria. Like keep these things in mind when you're writing acceptance criteria, basically, is like describe what like the end result looks like. Don't focus on like the how to get there. Like if there's a certain technology or like a code path or whatever, don't really mention that in acceptance criteria. And think of this kind of like empathetically, like as there's someone who's new on your team, and if you were to give this ticket to them, what context would be helpful to them? And essentially, any team member should be able to pick up and deliver any ticket is the goal you should strive towards. This is impractical for a lot of reasons, but that's the goal. So that's basically like defining explicitly what each ticket is doing. The next thing is document your standard operating procedures. So these are things that you do on a regular basis that don't really change. Like we're analytics engineers, so we don't really have to do a lot of like database stuff. But I don't know if you guys are around in Redshift and you had to like put it down for maintenance, and that would have been a good example of like a standard operating procedure. We don't have that anymore. So this is basically our PR checklist. This is anytime you submit a PR, here's everything we kind of like expect to see. dbt Labs has a similar one, and I think ours is kind of like a hybrid of that and GitLab and a couple other things. So that's one example. There's also like model naming and versioning and design docs are another like standard operating procedures. A lot of times these might be handled by like the engineering org in your company. So if you're not sure, ask them. And if it doesn't exist, you get to create it. That's the fun part. Then essentially, don't repeat yourself with macros. I'm not going to talk over these. I think dbt does a good enough job of like hammering in why you need macros. But these are sort of like some of the ones we use. And then the next thing is like the change boundaries with an architecture diagram. So this is like a very, very like high level 10,000 foot overview of what data at Vouch looks like. So we have raw data in Salesforce and Zendesk and a bunch of like other SaaS tools, but those are the primary ones. We have like proprietary application data from Vouch itself. This is like a Rails monolith, basically. We ingest that through Stitch or sometimes through Airflow. We just sort of pull that in from an S3 dump. And then there's transformation. So essentially, this arrow from ingest to transformation is writing the raw tables, and then the DBT and Airflow. Like we use Airflow as a scheduler for DBT, so we don't use DBT Cloud. Sorry, DBT people in the audience, but it's the way it is. And we essentially just run DBT, and so that's more of like your staging, intermediate, fact, dim, all those tables kind of go into Snowflake, and then we have a few different things that are sort of like consuming off of this. So we have mode here, essentially, which is the sort of power user of the data, which is all of the reporting that the business users look at. And we'll kind of get into team structure later, but that's sort of like the biggest dependency, most important dependency. There's some downstream sort of Airflow jobs that sort of take the data and do something with it. We've also like started exposing an API for other teams at the company to use, but hasn't really been used yet, but that's another common one. And then we're starting to do this, this logo is like Metaflow, which is like an ML project. And our ML engineers seem super excited about it. I don't know too much about it. The last one here is census. We basically use that to pipe some values back to Salesforce. And I think on the previous slide, there was one like last event for a customer or stuff like that is like we create macros for that and then pipe that back into Salesforce. Cool. The next thing is you want to invest in onboarding to make ramping up smoother. So this is my personal ID that I work in every day. This is PyCharm. But essentially, I've created a series of like Loom videos internally for how to get something similar on VS Code and how to get set up. And I think like having everything in this like one window is critical. So you have your file browser on the left, your editor in the middle, your database on the right, and then DBT below. And that's sort of like the setup. And so essentially, you never have to leave this editor in order to work on models. It's awesome. And so you're like, OK, all this stuff is great, but like you're basically moving from like 3, 4, 5, 6 people maybe in order to about like 10, 12 people. And so like now what's happening is that change management is a lot harder because a lot of the context seems to go missing in a bunch of places. And essentially, it's just harder to coordinate. Everyone has like different interests. They've been on the team for different amounts of time, so they have different context on different problems. And so what you inevitably end up starting to have to do is really like invest in automation, basically, in order to both like check everything that you want to check and keep code quality high and all that good jazz, while also making sure that it's not onerous on the people reviewing your code. Like, it's a lot easier to say, like, I want you to like look at these 5 things when you review code and not like these 50 things. And most people just like don't have the time, patience, and/or temperament for that, which is fair. So this is like, how do you scale up? And I think like a good quote here is from Jeff Bezos, that this is a David Perel tweet, but ignore that. So it's basically like, good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. And so you cannot just keep like throwing manpower at a problem and expect it to solve the problem, basically. You need to find a source of leverage somewhere, and often that source of leverage for data teams is automation. And data needs to scale with the rest of the organization, at least as fast, or preferably even faster. And of course, like change is the only constant. In a company that's growing like Vouch, like the data needs only get more and more complex over time. So like there's been like a bunch of new product launches, there's a new business unit, there's new states, and of course, like the compliance and like fiduciary, like legal and fiduciary responsibilities here, like so like compliance risks as an insurance company have just gone up because each product needs to be accounted for properly. So change has gone up. The other thing is just like the number of people have grown. So this is a picture of my lovely team. If you're watching this virtually, hi. And so essentially that's, the way I kind of like explain this is that the data engineers at the top, they're essentially sort of like more concerned with how do we bring data in to the organization. So they're like the airflow masters, and they like sometimes like write scrapers and do a lot of like knowledge graph and entity resolution stuff. There's a talk that my colleagues gave. If you're interested, I can point you to that. And then sort of like there's the analysts on the other side who are doing two things. They're basically like communicating insights out to business stakeholders, creating reports for them so that they can sort of self-serve on those insights. But also like a lot of their job is gathering requirements for what we should build next. And so me and Jenna are in the middle, where we're essentially kind of like talking between this, like the data engineering team on like what can we bring in, how does that work, and also the analytics team in terms of like how do we organize all the information that we brought in so that it makes sense and it's ergonomic, if you will. So that's kind of the team structure there. So like investing in automating guardrails, if you don't get the point already, best way to ship faster at scale with confidence. And I think the way to like gauge if your organization has this is that when you hit that green squash button in GitHub or GitLab or whatever, you should feel very confident that your change is going to do exactly what you think it will do at that point. So if you don't have that, then essentially there's, of course, work to be done. And even for like Vouch, there's always like work to be done, just as the scope of what we're doing grows more and more ambitious. So I think here I'll basically talk about like what does it feel like to have an automated code review process, because I can kind of like show it to you, but it just wouldn't work, because ultimately I think a lot of this is something you have to feel, especially if you haven't experienced what a streamlined code review process looks like. And so for that, essentially, so there's a few things that I expected would be faster reviews, because of course the computer is way better at checking through a bunch of things than any of us ever will be. Increased confidence, same reason, checking through a lot of things. And the last part I'll spend a bit more time on is like consistent code quality bar. If somebody tells you that you need to do a change in order to, like if you need to change your PR in order to get merged, there's sort of a tendency to like cut corners and maybe come back to it later. But if a computer tells you that, and if they sort of block you, there's no tendency, because you're just blocked from the merge. And so it means that at the bar, you've essentially said that like my code is at least up to this quality. And so you basically have like a more even code quality across your entire code base. Unexpected things, like one is like async reviews are awesome. So essentially, somebody can go in and like review the manual parts of it, which is mostly the logic, and be like, okay, this looks good to me. And then the person works on like basically figuring out what the computer's yelling about, fixing that. And then when they're done, they just merge it in. And there's no need for a second review because sort of the person has already looked at it. And also like reduced ego, because then essentially the humans in the loop can focus on what is important to comment on. They don't have to comment on like nitpicky style or other sorts of issues. They can just be like, maybe you should join against this other table instead of this table, stuff like that, which is actually important, and that's going to move the bar. And you can sort of have the computer do the rest. So you probably guessed already, everything old is new again. Software engineers have had all of this for years. Surprise Pikachu face, I guess. everything just works for them, and it's how things are naturally done, so they cannot even fathom a world in which this is not the case. Analytics engineering is now playing catch up with a lot of these best practices, but of course it's going to be a pretty long road ahead. You're not going to work through decades of like tools improvement in a couple years. But at the same time, it's very exciting since we are the ones who get to define what the new norms for this look like. So like people in this room, people watching on the stream, people in the Slack, and so that's really cool. I guess the thing I think about is like it feels like data engineering as a practice as a whole is kind of where web development was maybe like late 2010s, late 2000s, early 2010s, where you have some basic things, like you have a framework, you have jQuery, it's great. You have Git at this point, but there's still like so much more you can do. So that's exciting. Then quickly run through some of the automated guardrails we've put into practice. Again, these are 6. The first one, which I think everyone should do, is like isolate the chain sets with development, testing, production environments. So essentially, you want to make sure that the different chain sets are all independent so that they don't collide with each other. It's very frustrating when you're working on a model and another person on your team is working on a model that like either is a child or a parent of the model you're working on, and like things break for either one of you. So essentially isolate your changes. So the way we have it is like dev moves to CI, and so like, okay, so the bigger boxes, by the way, are databases, and the smaller ones are schemas. So essentially we have a dev database with like schemas for each developer. We have a CI database with schemas for each branch. And those are dotted because essentially they're ephemeral, which means that they get deleted after CI is done running them. So we don't keep them around for long. And then, of course, there's a staging where we run all the tests. And then once that's good, we sort of like promote it to production there. So that's that. This one I kind of like alluded to earlier. It's like enforced consistent code style with SQL Fluff. Great project. Works pretty well with DBT if you haven't used it. This is Jaffle Shop. There's a bunch of stuff that need to be fixed apparently. So yeah. And then sort of like the other thing we use a lot is Slim CI, which is basically rerunning only the models that have changed in CI. And so these are metrics for the past 12 months from CircleCI. So we've done 371 builds, so like 12 a day, and then 63% success rate. And I think the most important things are like the 2 last numbers. So like P95 is like 20 minutes, which is fine because sometimes you change like a very fundamental table that like affects everything. But the median duration is more important here. So like on average, your change will take 2 minutes and 40 seconds to run through CI, which at the scale I think is pretty cool. Next one is something I wrote because I was frustrated with getting a lot of the column names wrong between YAML and SQL. And so essentially this just like parses the artifacts and checks. Again, Jaffle Shop has an example where total order amount is only in YAML and not in SQL. So if anybody wants to take that PR. The next one is, I had to put a buzzword in there for like people who are playing the bingo. And so I put data contracts in there. But I think like if you think about it, like DBT exposures are data contracts. So they're basically nodes at the end that you can tack on. And we we have a system that like goes to mode, parses all the reports, parses the SQL, generates like the refs and the sources and all that, and puts it in a YAML like every hour, and then we have that ingested into our build system. It's a lot of work. But there's sometimes like companies like Census who will do it for you. So that's great. Then you don't have to build it yourself. We've just started this thing called blue-green deployments, where essentially this is similar to what I described earlier. You have 2 versions of prod, essentially. You have like staging and production, and then you run the tests on one of them, and then you swap them. And so you're essentially just like swapping. And so the beautiful part of this is that your production environment always is tested. And so you never run into the case where essentially you built the models, but then the test failed, and those models are still there in production. So to recap, what is change management, why you should care? Hopefully I convinced you. Getting started with change management, 5 patterns you can use today, how to scale it up, and why investing in the guardrails are important. And the last one is like how we've used that at Vouch, and what are the 6 patterns we use. So that's about it for the talk. Thank you. These are sort of like my, this is my contact info, or come find me in the Slack. And my boss wanted to tell you that we're hiring, so check out the page if you're interested. And that's it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Kshitij. That was awesome and very funny. So thanks, everyone, for joining us in person and online. If you'd like to submit questions or comments to our speaker, please do so in Coalesce Data Change Management on DBT Community Slack. The next session's titled Standardizing the Unstandardized, DBT Modeling for Web3 will be starting right here in this room at 5:30 p.m. CDT in 14 minutes. And in other rooms at the same time, we have Modern Data Management, how to set up your data for success, and Excel at Nothing, how to be an effective generalist. Thanks, see you soon.